Assalamualaikum Mufti.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
I have a question. What does it mean for a person to be faithful or to be a man of faith?
Well, faith has been used in many different ways. I think you are referring to, in our context, usually someone with the belief in the teachings of religion. So a man of faith, or to be faithful, means to be committed, right, to the teachings of Islam, the beliefs of Islam. But I think there is also the other important aspect of being faithful, which is not to just know and accept the teachings and the pillars and the foundations, but also to go beyond and be fully committed to it. So to be a man of faith is to stand up for your beliefs and to be able to withstand, challenges to the faith itself. So, for example, it's always easy to say that I believe in these things, but sometimes we are not able to, for example, prove our belief, right? So, if you are faithful to your marriage, as an example, you're faithful to your marriage, and we use the word faithful in a very general sense, but you are committed to it. So even if you have some challenges to the relationship, whether there's because of work or other things, you are fully committed to the marriage and to your spouse, that your spouse continues to have full trust in you being committed to the relationship. So there's no element of doubt, because you have proven time and again that, even with temptations, even with distractions or other kind of test, that you continue to uphold the trust that you have built between you and your spouse. Now, in the same way that as a Muslim, I remember the story of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam has always been used as Nabi Ibrahim or Ibrahim alayhi salam as a paragon of faith, because he was given one of the most challenging, probably the most challenging task any prophet or messenger could imagine, which is to sacrifice his own child. Of course, God in his grand scheme knew, and God knows that he will not ask Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam to sacrifice his child, but that was a test. And Nabi Ibrahim fulfilled the test and did well. And that is why in the Quran Allah says, Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan qanitan lillahi hanifa. So all those are about his faith to Allah. It's pure. It is full commitment, full dedication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a paragon. It's it's the most ideal that we strive for. And in the same way that beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he also emulated the footpaths or the pathways of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, committed to his faith even in the most difficult moments. So here I think faith, we're talking about iman, mu'min. But I think one of the difficulties is, when you ask anyone, any Muslim, they will say that iman is the most important. This is the most important thing. There is no disagreement that as a Muslim, iman is the most important. But the question is, how do you get there? How do you get to the stage where you fully understand what you need to believe in, and then you fully believe in and you're committed to it? Sometimes we get there through various means, right? We are born in a family of Muslims, and therefore we become a Muslim, a believer, someone with faith. Or sometimes you get introduced through other ways and means. Sometimes you have an experience. In fact, even people who have been born Muslims, sometimes they don't pay too much attention to the faith. But something happens in life, we call them reborn, born again Muslims, for example. And then, you feel that now I have faith, and now I really understand what this is all about, and I'm committed to it.
More convinced in a sense.
Convinced and committed. Yeah. But I think the challenge here, Ustaz Mateen, is that, faith is such a personal, private thing. It happens, or it takes place in your heart. So, for example, if I can just mention, Al-Imam Al-Hasan Al-Basri rahimahullah, he said, لَيْسَ الْإِيمَانُ بِالتَّحَلِّي وَلَا بِالتَّمَنِّي. So Iman is not about embellishing it or the outer appearance. وَلَا بِالتَّمَنِّي, not about hopes and wanting certain things, or you think that I should get paradise or something. وَلَكِنَّهُ مَا وَقَرَ فِي الْقَلْبِ وَصَدَّقَهُ الْعَمَلِ. Iman is something that rests right in your heart. So it's something very deep within us. And it's the same way that you think about, when you believe in your family, you believe in your spouse, you believe in your children. It's very difficult to tangibly, or scientifically prove it. But it doesn't rest there, because the danger of saying something is in my heart and says, no, well, I believe, and there's no evidence for it. There's a danger of that. So Imam Al-Hasan Basri said, وَصَدَّقَهُ الْعَمَلِ.
It's proven by deeds.
Proven by the deeds. So your actions will prove your belief. So this is what I meant earlier when we said about relationship, right? You can't just tell your wife, I love you, I'm committed to you. She knows you're bluffing, or she knows you're telling a lie because of your actions. We have to prove it through actions. The same way that a man of faith is not a man of just words. And that is exactly why in the Quran, read carefully, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Repeated time and again.
In many verses.
آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. It's not just about, you can't say, I believe, I have faith, but you have to do good deeds. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Those who believe and those who perform or do good deeds. As-salihat, deeds or actions that reconcile, actions that bring goodness, So they come together. And I think that is a measure of our faith, a man of faith, or being faithful, where we are committed to the belief through what is in our hearts, that we trust Allah, we trust the religion, but we also prove it through our actions. And you must find convergence between the two. So one of the ways in which we can tell that something may not be right with our belief or our faith, the Iman, is when the actions do not tally. When the actions do not tally. So insofar as our Iman, there are some basic teachings in Islam of what we should believe in, how we should believe, right? There are a lot of discussions and disagreements as to the specifics. In Islamic theology, if you did, Usuluddin and Aqidah and Falsafa, Kalam and theology and philosophy, a lot of debates about the specifics of certain things. But there are certain foundations or fundamentals of belief. And even so, that is still within our, it's the basic guidance is to help us ensure that our faith is right. Beyond that, of course, there are a lot of differences, like I said. But there are actions that will prove your belief, and those actions are governed even by greater principles, guidelines, and framework to ensure that both go together and you are following the right kind of faith or the right kind of belief.
To be committed in our beliefs, and of course that beliefs is then proven by our deeds and actions. Now, Mufti, today in this day and age where they are arguing a lot of contesting ideologies and also maybe even deviant teachings, how can we, maintain our faith, bring about ourselves as a man of faith in the face of all of these challenges?
Yeah, faith is not faith without test.
Mm-hmm.
You can only prove that you completely believe and you have belief is only when you are tested. أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Right? Do mankind think that they will be left to say or claim that they have آمَنَّا, we believe, وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ, and they're not tested. وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّا الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا وَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ. We have tested those before them. And through the test that we know those who have been truthful in their belief and those who have actually made up or fabricated the belief. So in other words, they don't actually really believe. So test will come, and I think test comes in all forms. I think you mentioned quite a couple of good examples. Sometimes there are ideas or ideologies that directly affect or challenge our belief. And I think in some cases which are worse, I think there are deviant teachings or errant teachings, which, if you look at the framework of Islam in its complete tradition, it goes against it. But you see, if I can just go a few steps back, one of the reasons why sometimes we believe and sometimes we are influenced is, as human beings, there's a lot going on in the mind, right? One of which is influence. We can be easily influenced by many things. So, for example, in matters relating to ideas or ideologies, as you said, we could be influenced because of many reasons. We could be influenced because we do find the ideas more attractive, or we find the ideas more relevant or useful for us at that particular point. We could be influenced because the person selling us the idea is a wonderful salesman, a very good salesman, so very charismatic, not just words, but appearance and everything else. We could also be influenced because of our state. So whether it's our own psychological state, we are in doubt, we are vulnerable, we have just gone through a difficult period in our lives, we are down, emotionally down. Someone comes and gives you a sense that they will save you or they will help you. You could be so there are a lot of reasons. So it could be psychological, it could be. So I think the problem for many of us, we often think that it's all about religion. It's all about the ideas itself, whether it's religious, it's not religious, whether it's right, it's wrong religiously. That is secondary. What is primary is why do some ideas sell? Not to everyone, but to certain people. So if you look at this very carefully, then you would also recognize that historically, there have been a lot of cults, for example. And I'm not just talking about Islam or Muslims. I'm talking about generally a lot of cults, a lot of people who are able to influence groups of people, through magic, through ideas relating to spirituality, scams, financial scams. That's a very good example. People promising you illogical gains, and you when you hear such stories, you think, how on earth did that person believe this thing and lost so much money? But at that state, if you catch me at the wrong state, and I'm in a vulnerable position, and pardon me for saying this, but a lot of people who actually trick people into believing in such people, they know when to come to you. So that's exactly why they come to you and they don't come to me, for example, or they come to me and they don't come to you, because at that point they might assess that you are quite stable, so you are not a target, so to speak, right? I could be, because they knew that I was a bit vulnerable. So there are psychological reasons, and I think that's important to also understand, because there are those kind of challenges or tests at the ideological level. At the ideological level, I think sometimes people fall for such ideas or ideologies because they are not certain of their own. They're not certain of their own. And this is what we meant earlier when we said faith itself. It's not something that, it's a question of how you get there. And a very important part of getting to faith, which is strong, like the faith of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, is to ask difficult questions, to think about your faith, tadabbur, tafakkur. Wa fi anfusikum afala tubsirun, inna fi khalqi samai wal ard, ikhtilafi al-layli wan nahar la ayatin li ulil albab, right? Inna fi khalqi samawati wal ard. So God asks us in the Quran to look, to observe, to contemplate, to reflect, and then you get faith. So the story of Nabi Ibrahim, I mean, he had a debate with his people. فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلُ رَأَى كَوْكَبًا. So it came night time, and then they saw the star, and they said, هَذَا Rabbi, this is my God. فَلَمَّا أَفَلَ قَالَ لَا أُحِبُّ الْآفِلِينَ. So, when the sun, yes, when the sun rises, the stars disappear. Of course, we know this is an astronomical phenomenon, because with light, the stars cannot be seen. So he said, but God can't disappear and appear, as and when. So there was a thinking process that went on. The same way that some people say that if you are a believer or you are faithful, you cannot have doubts, right? You say you can't be doubtful. And I think that's not right. A lot of scholars went through processes of, phases of doubtfulness in their faith even, but that often leads them to become stronger, but not through doubt that in which you don't find a way out in terms of answering your doubts. If you do, then you will become stronger. And I often quote this story of Nabi Ibrahim again in the Quran. When Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, he actually asked God a question, which to many people, if they don't read this or they don't understand this, they say, oh, it's almost blasphemous to ask God.
Why would he?
Yes, so in Surah Al-Baqarah, right, the story that Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam said, Rabbi arini kayfa tuhyi al-mawta. God, show me how you give life to the dead. Qala awalam tu'min. So God responded, do you not believe, Ibrahim? Right. So qala bala. Indeed, I believe, oh my God. Walakin liyatma'inna qalbi. So this itmi'nan, so that my heart is at rest, at peace with this belief. This itmi'nan is convinced to the extent that you, this is what we talked about, faith at a level where even if you face big test, you will not waver, you will not shake, because your foundations are very strong. And there was a process of questioning with God by Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. Then Allah says, "Qala fakhudh arba'ata min at-tayr fasurhunna ilayk," and until the end, cut a bird in 4 pieces and then put it on different mountain tops, and then you call them, and you will see that the bird comes together. That is how I give life to the dead. But I think the lesson in that particular verse is the conversation Nabi Ibrahim had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about a doubt in his mind. He believed that Allah gives life to the dead. Allah will resurrect, mahshar. But at that point, to the human mind, I can't imagine that. I thought when something dies, it dies. That's the end of it. So there was a kind of a lingering doubt. Some scholars say maybe it's because he wanted to explain to his ummah, but there is nothing in the verse that says that it wasn't Nabi Ibrahim's own question. And if you read very carefully, it's a very intimate dialogue. Qala awalam tu'min. Do you not believe? Qala bala walakin liyatma'inna qalbi. Right? So there is that element of doubt. And I think one of the reasons why sometimes we fall for ideas, going back to the question, ideologies, is partly because we ourselves are not convinced, or we don't really have strong foundations for our own belief. Even if you have practiced, you have prayed your entire lifetime, you fast, you go to the mosque, but if you did not, that element is one element which we said just now, the amalu salihat, right? They do good deeds. But if it's based, or rather it's built on very feeble foundations, quite weak in terms of your belief system, may God protect us, but if someone comes and starts giving you ideas, you may start to have self-doubt. Then how do you respond? In the same way that there might be people with, cultish behaviors, or wants to start a cult, is deviant, may have, crazy ideas. To many people, these are crazy ideas. Why would you believe? But it might affect some people, precisely because the foundations may not be strong. And the other very important thing, Abdul Mateen, is you asked me about how do you face these things, right? Is that framework of the amal. whatever belief that you have. So someone may come to you and say, "I've got this idea that I know I can speak to the angel, and the angel tells me today you don't have to do certain things, right?" So he says that I have access to the spiritual realm. You don't have that access because you're not there. You're not me, so you don't know. Fine, it's a private thing. I don't know how to prove that you're wrong. Whatever you're saying is crazy. But then he starts telling you, okay, so this thing is telling me that you should do certain things, A, B, C. Those things, in our tradition, in Muslim tradition, we have clear guidelines, what can and cannot be done. And that should be our safeguard, our criteria that will protect us. So if you hear things that clearly ask you to do things which are completely contradictory or prohibited or objectionable, never heard of, then you know that it's completely unacceptable. And that should be your safeguard. So whether it's about, you could have a parallel kind of, social construct or system where, in some cases, as spiritual wives, you can have a spiritual marriage. So no one. So I'm with you in this room, observed by, say, angels or spirits. You can't see, but only I can see them, and then we become husband and wife, for example. That is clearly out of line with Islam, because there's no such thing as marriage, in that realm, between human beings and so on. And then you also have other teachings where you don't have to pray, you just have to do certain things, I mean, if they have those ideas and they say this is a new religion or this is a new cult, they might call it whatever they like, but they cannot call it Islam.
Yeah.
It's not part of Islam, because Islam is very clear. So how then do we, what do we do and how do we protect our community? So this is where it's important that in all that we do, we continue to move together as one community, and we create institutions to protect it. Right? So for example, in learning about religion, we know that there will always be people, individuals. Remember I said earlier about the charisma and so on and so forth, who may want to come up with all these crazy ideas and start to bring people to those kind of problematic
groups.
Yes, pathways, right?
Yeah.
So we protect our community by building an institution of religious teachers. Well, first, they are qualified, they are registered, we know who they are, we know where they learned from, we know what they have learned, we know what they teach. So everybody knows about this. This is in the open. And that is one way to protect our community, where if you need to learn Islam and you want to get religious guidance, you get from people who are qualified. That is certainly, learning in the open. It's accessible to everyone. These are the kind of qualities of teachings which are open for scrutiny. There's nothing to fear, because it's something that we have learned for generations and we're teaching it. I think the danger is when, the early signs of danger is when things are done very secretly, exclusive groups, you don't allow anybody else to come. You say, people are not prepared to hear these things. So those are the kind of things that give you very early indication. These are, like red flags, or red signals that something is not really right. At the same time, I don't want to say that we cannot discuss and debate ideas, even if these ideas are, not very common, whether about religion and so on. I think we need to have that kind of platforms, but I think it's not the same as discussing and debating them as opposed to teaching them, right? So in many cases, people fall because they come in a vulnerable and also in an inferior position. So I come because I am here to learn and accept what you tell me. Entirely. Because I'm not in a position to debate with you. And that is a clear sign of danger. Unlike, say, there are other ideologies. Someone says that, I think on say, Islam and the political system, I think that certain things need to be done, and say, oh well, we have not heard this much before. Does that mean it's deviant? Does that mean it's wrong? No, we can have a debate, and you bring in scholars, you bring in experts to talk about it. And if it's proven wrong, then we say, fine, this idea is not acceptable. Now that's not the same as quickly when we are trying to protect the community from deviant or errant teachings, we say there must be clear guidelines as far as teaching is concerned. So we always say that a teacher, just like in any other context, a teacher is in a very powerful position of influence. So you need to ensure that the person who actually teaches stands in front of a class, however small the class can be, 3-4 people. That teacher needs to be accountable for what he or she teaches, in as much as he or she also needs to be accountable for his or her professional conduct as a teacher, right? So you, for example, you cannot abuse your power or position as a teacher, and do nasty things to your students. Same way that you cannot be preaching wrong things to them because you're in a position of influence. And I think we need to protect the community, especially in relation to teachings, that people who are actually teaching and found to be teaching, then they must be held to those kind of standards and those kind of criteria. Yeah, unlike say in a discussion or debate where everyone who participates are actually equals, and they are also trained, they can have a debate about certain ideas. So those are two separate things.
Wow, you mentioned about different motivating factors of how people can actually be attracted to certain ideologies, and some not. Probably psychological, it's not just about ideological factors, but also there's a factor where the community can take part in preventing or actually building a strong and resilient religious community. You also mentioned about the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, which also tells us that our faith is not just the blind faith, but also a faith with reason as well. That really brings light to how we can actually learn more about religion, to be strong and convinced, and also to be committed with all of this, with our tradition. And with that, Mufti, I would like to thank you, and give thanks to the listeners out there for being with us. And with that, we'll see you again, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.